22 years ago this week on May 24th, 1999. 3 years after, or 2 years. 2 years after being part of what I just talked about, one of the greatest matches in Raw history. WWE aired a special episode of Raw is War as a tribute to the late Owen Hart, who died the night before at their Over the Edge pay-per-view. They opened with a 10-bell salute. They aired several testimonials from talent throughout the night. The show ended with Stone Cold Steve Austin, one night removed from losing his title to The Undertaker, marching down to the ring in his camo gear to do a toast on behalf of the entire company, the whole roster. He was kind of the face that they sent down there to do the toasting at the very end in the middle of the ring. Austin was not shy before this about not being a fan of Owen after the botch pile driver that almost paralyzed him at SummerSlam. I know there was a Rolling Stone interview about 6 months before this where it was pretty clear that he still had not forgiven Owen for what happened. But on this night, this was about paying tribute to a fallen colleague. Not that television ratings were the most important thing on this night, but the show did a 7.2 Nielsen rating, which I believe is the second highest overall number in the history of Monday Night Raw. Second only to the 8.1 that they did a few weeks before this when Nitro was preempted by the NBA. Between Raw and Nitro on this night, more people were tuned into pro wrestling in one night than any other time since the days of Saturday night's main event. 12 years ago this week, on May 25th, 2009, Monday Night Raw aired live from the Staples Center in Los Angeles after being booted from the Pepsi Center in Denver with only 8 days' notice due to an NBA playoff game between the Nuggets and the Lakers that took priority. WWE booked the venue the previous August, claimed that nobody from the arena contacted them until about a week prior about the cancellation. Although they did try to help WWE move the event to the smaller Denver Coliseum, which seats about 10,000 people. Problem is, WWE had around 10,000 tickets sold for this event. And so maybe they could have squeezed everybody into that building, but they would not have been able to get anybody else in there. They wouldn't have been able to get their giant Raw set. You know how they love their big gaudy sets. Vince McMahon lost his mind. And, you know, I'm sure he also saw this as a PR opportunity, but he lost his mind, went on the offensive. Usually when he does this and he starts making the media rounds, he looks terrible. This was no exception. He was all over the media for an entire week, bashing Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Nuggets and the owner of the Pepsi Center, which is now called the Ball Arena. I guess that's its new name. He went on ESPN News to be interviewed by former WWE announcer Jonathan Coachman, who he never acknowledged. Coachman was, good to see you, sir. And he was, kind of, being all folksy with him and everything. And Vince was just, it was so awkward. You would think that Coach was just a total stranger and Vince McMahon didn't even know who this guy was. Like he never met him before. But McMahon said that it was his view. This is how he started the interview. He said it was his view that Stan Kroenke should be arrested for impersonating a good businessman. If he tried to tell jokes like this in a stand-up comedy club, people would throw fucking tomatoes at him. A good businessman, he said, does not book a World Wrestling Federation live event on a Monday night figuring that his team isn't going to make the playoffs. And yes, I did not make a mistake there. He said World Wrestling Federation. He misstated the name of his own company 7 years after the name change. He joked about challenging Kroenke to a cage match, and then he held up a Lakers jersey at the end of the segment. This is like a wrestling promo. The whole week, he was bashing Kroenke. Now, the whole week that he was bashing this guy, WWE was negotiating with Kroenke's company on some sort of resolution that would have seen them move the show to the Denver Coliseum anyway. And the Kroenke folks, it was far enough along that they thought that they had reached a verbal agreement And they even went as far as to draft a press release that was going to go out. All they had to do was click send. They were just waiting on approval from Vince and WWE, only for WWE to then go behind their back and make a deal with the Staples Center in the rival city of Los Angeles. And Vince McMahon later said that the deal breaker was the quote that Kroenke's people had drafted that would be attributed to him, that was going to be in the press release. And that quote would have read as follows. This is what Kroenke's people drafted, that they were hoping Vince would approve. I would like to thank Stan Kroenke and his management team for resolving this matter so quickly in a way that allows all WWE and Nuggets fans to watch 2 world-class main events Sunday and Monday, because they had 2 shows scheduled. By all accounts, Mr. Kroenke is one of the most respected professional sports teams owners in the world, and the professional way that he and his staff good-naturedly handled this conflict gives further testament to the type of business leader that he is. We look forward to Sunday's WWE event and future events at the Pepsi Center. McMahon told the Associated Press they would not even talk about making a deal other than paying our expenses, basically unless we signed some sort of joint press release. You would not believe what these people were attempting to make us do. I guess maybe running over us and throwing us out unceremoniously on our ear was not good enough. They want to trample us. And then he was ranting about that quote, which, as somebody who has drafted many a press release in his day, I will say I actually side with Vince McMahon on that quote. That quote was pretty fucking terrible. I mean, that's like one of those dear leader quotes. So I don't blame him for that. But Raw that night at the Staples Center opened with a painfully unfunny skit in the ring with Vince McMahon and a Stan Kroenke impersonator, which included Vince making fun of Kroenke's first name, Enos. Stan, I guess, is his middle name, but he goes by Stan Kroenke, but Enos is his first name, and he called Kroenke an Enos. He was fixated on this. You're an Enos! He's a fucking man-child. Look no further than this segment. He is a fucking man-child. I mean, we already knew that, but I give you Exhibit A. So he called him an Enos a whole bunch of times, and then he shoved the Kroenke impersonator down to the mat. The fans in Los Angeles, they cheered this because it's cheap heat when their team is playing Denver. But I think unless you lived in one of those 2 cities, I doubt anybody gave 2 shits about any of this. This just felt like one long therapy session that we all had to sit through on TV. The main event was a 10-man tag with the babyfaces wrestling in Lakers jerseys, going over the heels, wearing Nuggets jerseys, of course. But the match was noteworthy for another reason. Ken Kennedy had made his return to television that night after shoulder surgery. As part of the babyface squad, he was tagging with John Cena and Batista, MVP, and Jerry Lawler. During the match, Kennedy dropped Randy Orton on the back of his neck on a back suplex, and Orton was not happy about it. And just 4 days later, Vince McMahon made the call to fire Mr. Kennedy. Months later, in an interview with the Pro Wrestling Report, Kennedy had this to say about it. When I got to the building, I ran up behind him being Randy Orton, and I gave him a big bear hug from behind. And he treated me like I was just an acquaintance of his. And then he made such a big stink about me supposedly dropping him on his head. He literally blew up in front of all the talent. He didn't literally blow up. Fucking idiot. Yes, Randy Orton literally exploded. Anyway, he said Randy Orton blew up in front of all the talent, including Vince and Stephanie, and began to lecture me about how I had to be careful and how his health was very important. It just didn't make any sense to me. Randy jumped really, really hard. In wrestling, it's give and take. It was a matter of either I drop him on his head or I help him through this. His neck never even touched the mat, which makes me wonder why he even went to the trainer's room to get his neck taped up. He was so injured that he went on to wrestle 3 nights in Mexico. Randy Orton, not one to leave this alone, later responded on a Randy Orton fan message board. It's like a message board forum dedicated to Randy Orton that no longer exists. But apparently he would post there. I vaguely remember this. He would occasionally pop in there and post. I think the moderators had confirmed previously that whenever he would post there, it was the real Randy Orton. And Orton had posted about the birth of one of his children and some other stuff in the past. So anyway, Orton supposedly posted this. He is in denial. He thinks that you have to be able to do a moonsault to know how to work. And as for dropping me on my head, he did. He never got to see all 4 camera angles of him doing it. I did. Plus, the left side of my neck down to my trap was sore all week in Mexico. I did tell Ken that he shouldn't be dropping me on my head with such a simple basic move. He never said sorry, and he even called me a liar after the match. I remember looking at him in disbelief. And yes, I did tell management that I did not want to work with him after that. Who wouldn't? There's another thing. Never did I get my neck taped as he claims that I did in that interview that he did. Also, the whole bear hug story does have some truth to it. Early in the day that morning in LA, he came up behind me and grabbed me around my chest and picked me up off the floor. I don't know anyone who enjoys being tackled from behind and picked up off the floor. When he let go and I realized that it was Ken, I was like, oh, okay, you're back, cool. My reaction of his big return was watered down, and I found it very funny reading in his interview that he felt like I had an agenda, or almost like I wanted him gone. Not until I was given a belly-to-back suplex onto the back of my neck did I have any negative feelings with Mr. Anderson. I honestly hope for his wife's sake that he can find something else he's marginally good at and earn a living. I know he really wants to entertain, so good luck, Ken. You're gonna need it. Wow. Little salty Orton there. As I recall, a lot of people had it out for Kennedy around that time. I think John Cena and Shawn Michaels may have also complained to management at one point about him. And the Orton thing was just the final straw for Vince McMahon. And I also don't think they were very happy with him. He had done some media interview, something about steroids. I don't know if it was a radio interview or a TV interview where it almost sounded like he was defending the use of steroids. And the point is, I think Vince McMahon probably just used this as exactly the incident that he needed to get rid of somebody that he already didn't like and wanted to get rid of. He was looking for a reason, and this was the perfect reason for him to just shit-can the guy. 9 years ago this week, on May 24th, 2012, there was nearly an international incident in Brazil involving Chris Jericho at a WWE live event from Sao Paulo. The main event was CM Punk defending his WWE title against Jericho. Punk came to the ring waving a Brazilian flag that a fan had handed to him, and after he put it down, Jericho told referee Mike Chioda to hand the flag to him. And he proceeded to drop it on the ground and stomp on it multiple times to get heel heat. About 5 minutes into the match, Charles Robinson, who was not the referee for the match, but he comes running down to the ring and he tells Jericho, stop the match. You need to apologize for kicking the flag. If you don't apologize, you're going to be arrested. And Jericho looked up and he saw a group of armed Brazilian soldiers swarming the aisleway. And all of a sudden, Johnny Ace, who was on that tour, I think this may have been the first ever WWE show in Brazil. So maybe they sent him, because it was a special show. But anyway, John Laurinaitis was there. He comes out. He's waving his arms around. He's yelling that Jericho needs to apologize right now. This is not a joke. I mean, he is as serious as a heart attack. So Jericho realizes now the gravity of the situation. Punk, meanwhile, he's down selling. Jericho grabs the house mic in the middle of this match. And he says, I would never purposefully disrespect Brazil or its beautiful flag. I did it to entertain you. And I want to sincerely apologize to everybody in the arena and in the entire country of Brazil. I'm sorry. And with that, they finish their match. So they go to the back after it's over. Dean Malenko was the agent. He tells Jericho that one of the older soldiers who Jericho could see is just staring a hole through him. Malenko says, that guy, he wants to arrest you, like right now. He was so infuriated, he thought the whole thing was real. He thought the whole thing was a shoot. So Jericho, he says, I better text Vince and just let him know what's going on here. He texts Vince McMahon that he upset the Brazilian army by kicking their flag, and he promised Vince he would never do it again on any of the future tours. According to Jericho in his book, Vince texted him back immediately and said there would be no more Brazilian tours for him or for any of them. WWE will no longer be allowed to perform in Brazil in the future. WTF, Chris. That was his message. Jericho said that he had done stuff like that dozens of times before. What's the big deal? He said Vince was furious. Texted back, he goes, it was effing stupid. When was the last time I allowed this kind of shit? 1985? Go home, you're suspended. We will talk when you get back to the US. Thanks for ruining what would have been a great market for us. Who knows how this is going to hurt us elsewhere? And what Jericho didn't realize is that kicking the flag is a felony in Brazil. Take that very, very seriously. And Vince McMahon felt that not just to try to save, I guess, the Brazilian market, but also other international markets as well, he had to be forceful. He had to have this, publicly strong reaction, which is why he suspended Jericho. The announcement went up on WWE.com that Jericho had been suspended for 30 days. And Jericho was pissed that Vince didn't tell him first about the length of the suspension. He just went and announced it. And Vince was like, oh, I didn't mean for it to get out early. The website people put it up before we gave them permission to do so. And of course, Jericho didn't believe that. But McMahon was worried that something might happen to him. So he told him, look, fly out of the country with the rest of the crew. I think the next stop was in Ecuador. Fly to Ecuador, and from Ecuador you'll fly home. Do not get separated from the rest of the crew. That's how worried he was that something might happen to Jericho, or that he might get thrown into a Brazilian jail. Don't get separated from the crew. Meanwhile, he does tell a story about at the airport. They did separate him at one point from the crew. They took him to like this empty hangar at the airport, and they asked him to forfeit his passport, which he did, because what the fuck is he going to say? No. But that's where he started to get, really worried. And, 10 minutes later, they came back and they were going through his bags and they gave him his passport back and they let him, they let him fly out of there. But he said for a while it was pretty scary. And once he got on the plane, he texted Vince to thank him for checking up on him. And he says Vince McMahon texted him back and said, I love you, you idiot. AC/DC, still the best band. 7 years ago this week, on May 29th, 2014, WWE aired its first ever NXT Takeover show from Full Sail University. This was the company's second live NXT special on the brand new, at the time, WWE Network. After the NXT Arrival show in February, that was not a takeover. Takeover did not start until May. On the show, Charlotte Flair, with Ric Flair in her corner, beat Natalya with Bret the Hitman Hart in hers to win the vacant NXT Women's Championship in an excellent match. Probably, even after all these years. I mean, we've had a lot of really good women's matches since then. That was around the time they started to finally take the women's division, or just women's wrestling in general, more seriously than they really ever had before in company history. I mean, you can use their buzzwords if you want to, the women's revolution or the women's evolution. You can call it whatever the fuck you want. This really was the beginnings of it with these women in NXT, Charlotte, Bayley, Becky, Sasha. And this match was, at the time, regarded as one of the best women's matches in company history, and probably would still be pretty high up on a lot of people's lists. It's a very good match. Same night, Natty's husband Tyson Kidd lost to Adrian Neville in the main event for the NXT Championship. I loved that run that Natty and TJ had down there in NXT, especially Tyson Kidd. He was killing it down there with the matches that he was having with Neville and with Tyler Breeze and a lot of the, maybe Sami Zayn, I think, as well. You know, a lot of those guys. Just really, really good stuff. And then when he got called back up to the main roster, he started tagging with Cesaro. And of course, they started to build some momentum as a tag team. And then the following year came the injury in the match with Samoa Joe. And that was it. His in-ring career was over. He has not had a match since. And 2 years ago this week, on May 25th, 2019, All Elite Wrestling hosts its very first pay-per-view event titled Double or Nothing. From the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, nearly all of the 11,000 tickets they put on sale were gone. 3 months before, in a pre-sale, they went in less than half an hour. Not too shabby for a supposed t-shirt company. There was a real hunger for an alternative to WWE's product. Now, whether you think it's enough of a real alternative, here we are 2 years later, right? Whether or not you think AEW is really this great alternative to WWE is up for debate. The one thing that is not up for debate, whether you like AEW or not, competition is never a bad thing. I was at that show, third row ringside. I had a blast. I had the Cody and Dustin Rhodes match as the match of the night. Some people might say Young Bucks against the Lucha Bros. Young Bucks retain their AAA tag team titles over Penta and Rey Fenix. Chris Jericho pinned Kenny Omega in the main event, which was not as good as their Tokyo Dome match. Or I should say, as Marv Albert called him during one of the NBA games leading up to this pay-per-view, when they were promoting it, Marv Albert called him Chris Jericho. How the fuck do you screw up that name? Of all the names to screw up, Jericho? How does that happen? After the match, the debuting Jon Moxley appeared from out of the crowd to attack both Jericho and Omega to close out the show. Tonight, as I am recording this, is their third Double or Nothing show, and the first one is still the only one to actually be held in Vegas. Here's hoping they can make it back there in 2022. And that is this week in wrestling history.